Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea, in another 5 paint challenge video using just Abaddon Black, White Scar, Mephiston Red, Steel Legion Drab and Leadbelcher. I'm going to be painting up this model as a Word Bearer's Chaos Space Marine using just 5 paints. As you can see, the first thing I've done is I've primed the model black to give us a nice smooth even base coat for our colours to work from. Now the first thing I'm doing is I'm coming in with some Mephiston Red and I'm going to paint all over the armour to the model. This is going to take a couple of layers to get smooth coverage all over the power armour, but just work in a couple of thin layers, slowly building up to solid coverage of Mephiston Red all over our Word Bearer's Chaos Space Marine. You don't need to worry about being too neat at this stage. If you get the Mephiston Red over other areas, it doesn't matter, because we'll be coming back in later and painting over these details with other colours. So for now, just work your way around the model and a couple of thin, smooth layers of Mephiston Red build up to solid coverage all over the power armour. And after a couple of layers of Mephiston Red, you can see we've got a solid coverage all over the power armour. So next thing I'm going to do is pick out some of the details on the model. For this, I'll be using Abaddon Black. And I'm going to pick out details such as the undersuit to the armour. I'm going to be nice and careful around the red. Just going to make sure I pick out all of the ribbed parts of the armour suit showing between the panels with a couple of layers of Abaddon Black. Just making sure I catch all of those undersuit areas with a couple of layers of black. I'm also going to carefully pick out the inner part to the shoulder pads as well. It's going to take a couple of layers to get solid coverage. It's going to make sure I get all of that inner part to the shoulder pad with some Abaddon Black as well. I'm also going to pick out details such as the gun holster on his waist. I'm not worried about getting the straps at this stage, but making sure I get the holster with some Abaddon Black, as well as any pipes or cables or anything like that on the model. I'm going to pick out all of these details with black as well. Obviously being careful around details like the armour, things like that, just making sure I catch all of these pipes with some Abaddon Black. I'm also going to pick out the casing to his gun as well. So I'm going to make sure I catch all of these details with some Abaddon Black, but being really careful around all the armour we've already painted Mephiston Red. Just catching these details with some black. And after those details have been picked out, you see it's broken up that red colour a little bit and added some detailing to the model. So next I'm going to paint all the horns and the straps. For this, I'm using Steel Legion Drab. So I'm going to pick out detailings like the straps here, holding the holster to his leg, just picking out these straps with some Steel Legion Drab. If this model had any fabric on it, I'd be painting the fabric with Steel Legion Drab as well, but this one doesn't, so it's just going to be all of these straps being nice and neat around the red power armour. Going to make sure I catch the belt as well, being really neat around all the black that surrounds it, but just catching that belt with a couple of layers of Steel Legion Drab. I'm also catching the horns on the model as well, so this one's got these ones here on his head, just making sure I catch all of these sort of details with some Steel Legion Drab. With the Steel Legion Drab details picked out, you can see it's added more interest to the model. So now it's time to start picking out all of the trim on our Word Bearer. For this, I'll be using Leadbelcher. I'm just going to carefully pick out all of the trim details with a couple of layers of Leadbelcher. So this step is going to take a while, but just work your way around the model, picking out all of that trim with a couple of layers of Leadbelcher. Try to be nice and neat. Obviously, if you do make any mistakes at any point, you can tidy back up with a bit of the colours that you've accidentally painted over. Just make sure you pick out all of that trim with some Leadbelcher. I'm also going to make sure I'm picking out all of the detailing on the model as well. So where there's some of these ornate parts to the armour, I'm picking these out with Leadbelcher as well. Painting all of these details are what really give us that chaos look to the model. So it's really worth taking your time, making sure you pick out all of these details with some Leadbelcher. Really make sure you focus on the detailing on the helmet as well, because this is going to be a focal point to the miniature. It's really worth taking that extra little bit of time just to make sure you get these details looking fantastic. As well as the trim, I'm going to pick out all of the areas of chainmail and any other trinkets on the model as well. So this one here has got the chainmail hanging down from his waist, as well as this trinket coming down here as well. So I'm just going to make sure I pick out all of these with some Leadbelcher. And I'm also picking out any detailings on the backpack. So all of the vents and details like that, I'm going to make sure I pick these out with some Leadbelcher. Obviously being careful around all the parts of red and other detailing. Just picking all of these out with a couple of layers of Leadbelcher. And finally, I'm going to pick out any of the metallic details on the gun as well. So details like the muzzle, any bullets, magazine housing, all of these details. I'm just picking these out with a couple of layers of Leadbelcher. And with all of those metallic details picked out, you can see it's really given the model that chaosy look now. As soon as the trim is metallic, it really does give it that appearance of a heretical model. So now with some Abaddon Black, it's time to create a shade. So I'm taking some of the black, adding it to my palette and adding a lot of water, really thinning this down so it flows nice and smoothly off of my brush, as well as easing off on that black colour slightly. And now I'm simply applying this as an all-over shade to the model. So you want to make sure this doesn't pull too heavily in any of the recesses. If you do see it pooling, wick it away with a dry brush. Make sure you shade all over the miniature with some of this watered down Abaddon Black, so it will sink into all of the recesses, hug all the detail, really add definition to the model when it dries. Just apply some of this watered down Abaddon Black all over the miniature and making sure it doesn't pull too heavily in any of the recesses. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below. And after that shade has dried, you can see how it's darkened down all of those areas, but added definition all over the model. So now it's time to start highlighting the red power armour. For this, I'll be mixing some Mephiston Red with White Scar. It's just a little bit of White Scar, about a 3-to-1 mix. I don't want this colour to be too pink. I just want to create a slightly lighter shade of red, so I can apply an edge highlight to all of the power armour. So with this mix, I'm just picking out the very edges, all of the panels of power armour. I'm applying a very thin edge highlight of this mix, so So it'll give the impression of light catching on the sharper edges of all of the power armour. So take your time at this stage, work your way around the model, and apply a little bit of this mix as an edge highlight to all of the details on the power armour. Try and keep these lines nice and small where you can. Just catch the sharpest points, most raised edges of any of the panels of power armour with a really thin edge highlight of this mix. If you do make any mistakes with these edge highlights and come in a bit too thick, you can tidy back up with a bit of Mephiston Red, but try and keep these lines nice and thin and just catch the very edges of all of the panels with a very thin edge highlight. So try and be really careful on the helmet. As this is the focal point, it's worth making sure you pick out every single raised detail that you can. Just catch them all with a really thin edge highlight of this mix. I'm also picking out all the details on the backpack, the edges of all the panels, as well as any of these rivets or bolts that are on the backpack as well. I'm just making sure I catch all of these with a really thin edge highlight of our lighter red. With that edge highlight applied, you can see how it's added definition to the edges of all of the panels on our word bearer. So next, with some white scar and Abaddon Black, I'm going to make a grey paint. This is about 2 to 3 parts black to 1 part white. It's going to create a colour that's similar to Mechanicus standard grey. Just going to mix those two colours together. I'm going to start highlighting all of the details that I painted with Abaddon Black. So it's going to be the ridges to all of the details on the undersuit, just catching the very tops of all of these ridges with a really thin edge highlight of this grey mix. It's going to catch the edge of the pouch as well. For these sharper points, you can use the side of your brush. It will give you a nice straight, even line. For some of the other parts, you're going to have to use the tip. Just keep the lines nice and small, but catch all of that pouch with an edge highlight of this grey. And much like with the undersuit, I'm getting all the raised parts to the pipework with a thin edge highlight of this grey. And finally, I'm catching the very edge of all the details on the gun casing as well. Keeping these lines nice and small, just catching the very edges with a thin edge highlight of this grey mix. And with all the black details applied, the next thing I'm going to highlight is all of the areas that we painted with Steel Legion Drab. For this, I'm doing a mix of Steel Legion Drab and White Scar. Mixing the two colours together to create a slightly lighter brown. I'm just going to use this to highlight all of the straps on the model. So I'm catching the very edges, raised details with a little bit of this light brown mix. If this model had any fabric on it, I'd be doing the same on all the sharp edges and folds of the fabric as well. Just catching all of these details with a little bit of this lighter brown mix. And for the horns, I'm just catching the raised parts with a little bit of this mix as well. So where they've got ridges, I'm just catching the very tops of those with a bit of our Steel Legion Drab and White Scar mix. And with all of those details painted, our word bearer is almost complete. But we do have to paint the eyes on the model and the eyes on the trinkets as well. For this, I'm starting off with Abaddon Black. Just going to put a little bit of this into the recesses of the eye lenses, being really careful around all the armour we've already painted and highlighted. Just catching those eye lenses with a bit of Abaddon Black. And I'm doing the same to the eyes on the trinkets as well. So this model's got one here on his gun, and there's one hanging down from his waist. So I'm just catching the eye parts of these with some Abaddon Black. With the eye lenses and trinkets picked out. Coming in with a little bit of white scar now. And I'm just going to add a small spot in the back corner of each of the eyes. So for the eye lens on the helmet, it's just a tiny spot in the very upper back corner to give the impression of light reflecting off the eye lenses. And it's the same on the ones on the trinkets as well, but for these I'm doing a slightly larger spot just at the very top of the eyes. And with those eyes painted, that is all the details on a word bearer. But these guys are famous for having script on their armour, so I'm going to paint some of that now. For this I'll be using pure white scar again. I'm just going to very carefully add some scratchy lines in certain places to give the impression of text. So you want to make sure you're doing some up and down jaggedy motions, but leaving gaps between them. From a distance this will read like text painted onto the armour. You don't need to go too heavy with this, just pick a couple of panels and do some of these scratchy lines of script written on the armour. Will give the impression of writing on some of these armour panels. And with that extra detail added, it's really making this model read like a word bearer. So the only step left to do now is to tidy up the base. And as always, I'll be using Abaddon Black for this. Just going to apply a couple of layers of Abaddon Black all over the base to cover up any overspills of paint and give a nice uniform look to that base. So I'm covering all of the top and the rim with a couple of layers of Abaddon Black till I get a nice solid, clean looking base for my miniature. Obviously, if you're not using just 5 paints, you can use texture paints and base your model like you normally would. But for this challenge, I'm just going to give the model a solid black base to stand on. And with the base picked out, that is how to paint a word bearer Chaos Space Marine using just 5 paints. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments down below what other Chaos Legions would you like to see me attempt with just 5 paints. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, an extra special thank you to Jenkins, our Tea Lover channel member. Thank you so much for the support and happy painting.